with an associated network of NGO taking action on behalf of women around the world. I will say that it's not more a book. I think that is a movement. And this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to do a movement with all of us doing changes in the world for better. As I say in the book, and as you say in there, women aren't the problem, they are the solution. So it's my pleasure to give the floor and to...
Thank you. Thanks very much. How has the conference been so far? Great. Okay. You know, people always, I'm sure, say that they're delighted to be here. In fact, I just got back from Sudan, and I was a little bit curious about why Sudan had actually given me a visa, and I was a little concerned it was so they could grab me. So considering the alternatives, I am really glad to be here. I'm also glad because, I mean, this is indeed part of the movement that has already been in the works. It's an incipient movement. It's gaining ground. And I think that this will be remembered, that when people look back in 50 years, 100 years, they will see this as the birth of a much larger movement on these issues, just as the 1960s, for example, was the birth of an environmental movement. For Cheryl and me, our awakening on these issues really began when we lived in China. Half the sky is, of course, a Chinese expression, ban bian tian. Cheryl and I, this is Cheryl and me in China about 2 weeks ago. That obvious. One way of telling exactly how long ago it is that our eldest son on my shoulders there is now a high school senior. So he grew really fast in the last 2 weeks. But when we were in China, we really saw, we were interested and fascinated in the economic boom and looking at the roots of that and what lessons there were in the Chinese and in the broader Asian economic boom that could be extrapolated and borrowed and used by other countries. And a lot of those lessons had to do with educating girls and bringing those educated women into the formal labor force and seeing a kind of virtuous spiral unfold. There were a lot of examples where we saw that. Maybe one of those that touched us the most involved this girl. This is a girl called Dai Manju, and this is in Hubei province in the middle of the country in the Dabia Mountains, very poor area. This was in 1990. And Dai Manju was the brightest kid in her school, but she had to drop out because her parents didn't want to pay $13 in school fees because she was a girl. The principal was there beside her. The principal and the other teachers were aghast that the brightest kid should have to drop out in that way. And they told me about the case. Cheryl and I used it for a front page article about how so many really bright girls were having to drop out of school for want of these tiny amounts in school fees. And maybe you can imagine what happened next. After her picture was on the front page of the New York Times, we were then deluged with envelopes from readers, people who wanted to help just that girl, who wanted to help Dai Manju. Most of the envelopes contained checks for $13. Times readers can occasionally be a little bit cheap, you know, but we, present company accepted, I should add. But we also got one wire transfer from a New York reader for $10,000 to help her. We took that money to the school, worked out a deal with the principal, whereby, because it was girls who were dropping out, that money would be used as a fund to pay the school fees for girls who were doing well academically but would otherwise be in danger of dropping out. The girls in that area were just thrilled. For the first time in this community, your academic achievement would be a function not of your chromosomes, but of your intellectual capacity. We called up the donor to express gratitude and give him a report. He seemed sort of surprised by the call, but we told him that his donation had just resulted in a transformation of this community's prospects. He seemed even more surprised. And I said, well, you just wouldn't believe how far $10,000 will go in rural China. There was this confused silence, and he said, $10,000? I only sent $100. Well, as a trained investigative reporter, I sensed a real problem here. So we, it turned out indeed that he had wired $100, and the bank, a Morgan Guarantee, had a little trouble with that decimal point. I always figured that banker was later put in charge of subprime mortgages, you figure? So I didn't know what to do. I couldn't imagine going back to that community, telling those girls that they would not indeed have the support that they thought was there. I'm not really proud of what happened next. Maybe feels a little more like bullying than journalism. I called up the chief spokesman for the bank and explained the situation, laid it all out. They'd made this error. The girls had come to rely on it. They were planning to get this education. Then I explained the follow-up article I was doing. And I said, now, on the record, are you planning to dispatch a banker out to Hubei province and try to recover that $9,900 and force all these girls to drop out of school? He said, on the record, under the circumstances, we're delighted to make a donation of the difference. So what you had was a real fascinating natural experiment in what happens when you do have this kind of one-time exogenous investment in girls' education in one community, randomly chosen by an incompetent banker in New York. And over the years since 1990, we've gone back and we've seen what happened in that community as opposed to others. And make no mistake, all of Hubei province, all of China has become better educated over time, become obviously much more prosperous. This community has been truly transformed far beyond the others. Dai Manju herself became the first person in her family to graduate from elementary school, from middle school, from high school, then went on to the equivalent of a community college, earned an accounting degree. She went down to Guangdong province in the south, became an accountant, sent money back to support the community to start businesses, and then more recently she left this larger company and started her own little company in Guangdong. So many other girls who otherwise would have been marginalized, looking after goats, working in the rice paddy, ended up getting a great education that was then instrumental in supporting the larger community. And it wasn't as if boys were the loser. Everybody was a beneficiary. This community really was transformed by this kind of a virtuous cycle that unfolded. And we saw that kind of thing in so many other places. That was the germ of the idea that led to Half the Sky.